The expansion adds a lot more control, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it makes the game better. Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. and today I'm reviewing QE Commodities, the expansion to QE. Now, QE is a game that I've reviewed previously on the channel. I'll throw a link down below to that. You can check that out. Bizarre game that is surprisingly works very, very well. I'll give you brief overviews here, but first, before we do, this is a prototype, link to the Kickstarter down below. All things, components, rules, all that stuff subject to change. QE, at its core, again, 60 seconds on this, QE at its core is an auction game in which you can spend whatever you want. Literally whatever you want. You're going to flip over one of these tiles, which is going to be the business, the entity that everyone is bidding on. The auctioneer will enter their bid, whatever their bid. It could be a simple $100 into this tile over here. We'll put 100, and then everyone will secretly enter their bids into their own tiles, and they can put whatever they want. You can put $117, that's a perfectly valid bid. Us is $117 billion. That is also a perfectly valid bid, even if my handwriting is terrible. That's the core concept. The reason you're trying to gather these tiles over here is you're going to score for them on your board. Your board lists how you score for them. You're going to want to score tiles in your specific, your country, Europe, or whatever that you have over there. You get a nationalization bonus. Each tile also has points on it inherently. You're also going to be able to bid 0 3 times in the game, or 4 times in the game, depending on what player count you're playing at, and get extra points for that. You're trying to gather sets of tiles over here for either monopolies in those tiles, or alternatively for diversification within those tiles. So again, giving you more reasons for all those things. And then finally, at the end of the game, the person who spent the most points loses entirely. They're just not eligible for winning no matter what their score was. And the person who spent the least money gets 7 extra points. That's the core of QE. QE as an entity thrives in different ways, but the way it thrives for myself, for our group, is the craziness in which you bid. The way the escalation of the game starts off. You're bidding $100, very reasonable. You're bidding $117. Then before you know it, someone bids $2,724. Someone counters that with $152,000, which is immediately countered by $976,000, up to $1.3 million, up to $246 million, then $1.1 billion, $17 billion, $836 trillion, and before you know it, you're starting to enter numbers we don't even know exist in order to actually win the tiles, which makes all your previous bids in the first rounds of the game feel completely meaningless, because your whole, I don't get points if I spent the most money, well, your $1 million bid that you were worried about in the 14th auction is completely immaterial by the time you get up to the 18th auction in the game. And that's basically what's happening in QE. That's the base game. Commodities introduces, well, shockingly enough, commodities. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and move this out of the way over here, just so we can have the space in the camera. We're going to move these out of the way, and we're going to add commodities to the table. Here we have commodities that enter your supply, along with a few rules changes to the game. Now, when the auctioneer bids, after 2 players have gone through their bids and announced what they've won, the auctioneer is going to say, by the way, you've won this tile, enjoy, you're welcome to this tile, but second place has gone to Japan. And Japan in second place is going to be able to pick one of these commodity tiles. They'll pick one of them. Let's say they pick some cryptocurrency over here. We'll explain more why and how that works. They're going to pick the cryptocurrency, and then the auctioneer writes down on the back of their tile over here what that bid was, the second place bid, and their spend at the end of the game is going to be reduced by that amount. Okay, so that's the first thing. Your spend is being reduced by the amount of the second place bid, potentially incentivizing different options, especially if you're someone who doesn't want to give the person who's currently the auctioneer, if you don't want to give them a $1.1 billion deficit in how much they actually spent, not really deficit, reduction in how much they spent, then be mindful of your second place bid potentially being $1.1 billion. The second thing, and perhaps more impactful, not perhaps, almost certainly more impactful, is the fact that these are all associated with points in different ways. Now, this will be listed on your commodity card over here. Crypto is simply worth the value of the crypto. We'll get to what that is in a second. Gold is worth the value of gold, but if all the gold has been taken, if there's been a run on gold and there's nothing left in the supply, then all the gold is worth 3 points less each. Then you have over here oil, which oil is going to give you points as well, but whoever has the most oil gets 5 points, and those points can be spread if people tie for it. Those are the 3 engines you have. Now, crypto doesn't have any extra bonuses attached to it, but we do have varying numbers, ranging from $0, 5, 2, 8, or even 10 potential points, not dollars, points for those tiles. So crypto, wildly all over the place, but it can give you very large chunks of points if you go ahead and dabble appropriately. Oil will give you the fewest points at 4 or 5 points per tile, but you do get that 5-point bonus if you do get the most oil. And then finally gold. Gold comes in at 6 or 7 points per tile. Prototype, notice the stickers written over there. Gold will come in at 6 or 7 points per tile, but again, you do run the risk of your gold being worth less than you planned if there is a run on gold. Which means when you bid second place, depending on what you go for here, you might be getting 7 points. You might be getting 10 points. You also might be getting 0 points as well. You are basically looking at somewhere between, let's ignore the zeros for a second, you're looking between an average of, let's say, 4 to 8 points for your second place bid, for each of your second place bids. Now, if you've played QE before, getting 4 to 8 points for second place is hugely impactful, which is where we start to dive into the review part of things. Because, ease of play, the expansion is pretty easy to add, especially if you've played QE before. It's a little bit to wrap your head around exactly what's happening, but the core sequencing is fairly easy. As far as anything else, all the usual review stuff falls under the QE review, so I'm just really going to talk about how the expansion changes the game. The expansion adds a lot more control to your game of QE. The fact that the second place bid is so impactful, so meaningful, and in some cases is going to be more valuable than your first place bid, depending on what you get. When you get a first place bid, sure, you're going to get the 2 points in this tile, but it may or may not add enough points over here to be worth it. Maybe it adds 3 points, maybe it adds 2 points, maybe it gets you your fourth tile in a set over there, and now suddenly you're going from 6 points to 10 points. That means getting this as my fourth tile in agriculture could get me 2 points for the tile itself, plus 4 points extra for being my fourth tile in agriculture. That's 6 points. That's tremendous. But I can also just get 6 points for gold, or 7 points for gold, or perhaps 10 points for crypto. Suddenly there's a different conversation on the table. Now granted, if this is also your nationality, it's worth an extra few points for nationalization. It also might be going towards a set, so there are times where this tile is worth more points than what you're spending over here, but possibly not. It may totally change the entire conversation as far as how these tiles work, as far as what the currency is, as far as how much money you spent, as far as how you reduce the auctioneer's bid, but most importantly, it makes second place very, very tempting. And that suddenly changes the nature of the game. Because once you figure that out, you're walking into QE with less of an incentive to spend hundreds of thousands of millions of dollars to always constantly escalate the bid, but there's suddenly a degree of self-control contained within the engine. You bid less, you might still get second place, but you're also not giving the auctioneer quite as much of a discount. So suddenly second place is very, very tempting when it was never tempting before. There was $0 bids, which would give you a few points. There was the main bid to actually win, and everything else was a game of just laughing your head off as players completely tanked the economy while spending as much as they possibly could. I don't know why that's funny, but in a game it's funny. It is funny in a game. And so QE Commodities gives you a lot more control to your engine by changing the entire economy and the incentive to actually go high versus to rein in your self-control. Although again, very group dependent as far as how the game plays. As far as my final thoughts on it, as far as what it adds to the game, do I like it, do I not, what does it add, do I recommend it, all of that stuff. The short version is, it kind of depends on what kind of player you are. QE Commodities gives you a lot more control if you are the kind of group that appreciates diving into QE as an actual, game where the goal is to win, where the goal is to try to strategically outpace, outmaneuver, and outbid your opponents. Well, QE Commodities gives you a lot more control there and a lot more fun in terms of being able to have different levers on that engine. At the same time, and the flip side and the downside, is if you like QE as an uproariously hilarious game of just bidding out to the millions, well then Commodities allows you to still do that. You could still do that within Commodities. It's not that you can't do it at all, it just changes the nature of the game. Commodities allows you to play it both ways while giving you more control over the stable market of QE. But if you're diving into QE in terms of just for the laughter and the hilarity, well then Commodities is adding, the price point, you have to buy the expansion, it's adding rules overhead to the game, not complicated rules, but still extra rules to what was a previously very simple game and is now simple plus a bit, while not necessarily changing the experience if you're diving into it that heavily. And so I think Commodities depends on who you are. If you just like QE and you want everything QE, well then go ahead and pick up Commodities. If you like playing QE with a controlled state behind it, definitely pick up Commodities. But if you like QE with a sense of just the craziness of what QE is or was and you never had a problem with it and you don't want to spend the extra money on Commodities, then I don't think it necessarily improves that particular experience of QEs. For me, I'm happy I own it. I'm happy I have it. I mean, it's a prototype. I'm happy I will own it. But as far as being a necessary expansion, it just depends on how you approach this game. Until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I'll throw a link to the whole Kickstarter and all that stuff down below. And as always, have a good one.